Oh, wait. I think it might be working now. Possibly. Is it possibly working? Or is it not? I think it's working now, Dad. Dad?
What?
Yeah, it's working now. Not sure what the issue was. Is that you watching? Just bring the phone in here and I'll hook you up. Let me know if anybody's in the chat. I think I see one person. I'm not sure who that is. Sorry I'm late. It took like 10 minutes to get started. I was having some issues with the connection. We are here to discuss a whole load of books that we read this year, so we'll get started here in a couple minutes. Wait for some folks to show up. Did you find it yet, Dad? I'll bring it in here. I'll show you how to do it.
Search for what again?
Don't search. Just go to your subscription feed.
Oh, come on, I don't
I'll
know.
bring it in here, Dad, and I'll show it to you. But I don't want to get up in the middle of the stream right now.
It comes up on YouTube, but you said don't search for it. So
Just gotta go to. I don't know what you're in some weird
you do it
setting.
usually,
I don't know. You're on some weird shit here. Just go to this YouTube here,
Where was that one?
whatever you were on, and then you just go right there, and it pops up right there.
When you going on?
There's not. I'm on live right now.
Oh, you are.
Dude, you're gonna have to turn it down when you're in here, though.
Yeah.
Turn it back up when you get in the other room. It looks like it's
Are you talking? You're not talking.
it's connecting finally now, but I don't know what the problem was earlier. So far, we've only got one person here. Looks like we got two people. I'm gonna wait a couple more minutes. I know some more folks are supposed to be showing up. Once we get four people, we'll start. Man. Good evening, everybody. Let me know how your night's going. Introduce yourself in the chat so I know who I'm talking to. And we'll probably get started here. I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes just because we were late getting started. We'll start in about 2 minutes here. I can't even show you the huge collection of books here that we have to get through, but because I don't want to lift my computer. It's quite a few. Let me count these real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 32 books to get through. 32 books that we read this year. I think I actually read one more, but my friend is actually borrowing it. Hopefully she's going to read it soon. So we're going to start. I'm just going to fill up my water. I'll be right back. So let's get started here. Looks like we got 3 people. Feel free to introduce yourself. Let me pull my my live chat up here so I can keep track of y'all. I should probably log into my other account. I was just checking to see how it looked on my other page. All right, we are ready to get started. Hope everybody's having a good week. Happy New Year. I was intending to do something last night, but I had to be up early this morning and all that good stuff. So I did not really get to chat with you guys at the close or the opening of the new year last night. Hey, Charles, we had some technical difficulties earlier. For some reason, I don't know, I'll have to call you and ask you about it later. It said something about wanted me to update the stream key or something like that, outdated stream key or something. But finally, the software on YouTube allowed me to go live. So I'm trying to figure out what stack we should start with, and each stack is about this big. So I'm not going to do I'm obviously not here tonight to do a full analysis of every single one of these books, but I just wanted to do a little quick recap of the year to, let you guys know what we read, which books stood out to me, which books were the most interesting, and we will go from there. So I think we're going to start out with this stack right here, and we'll start out with Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions. You guys might have seen my review analysis of that. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Hope you guys will enjoy this. And like I said, it's going to be kind of a long stream, but we'll try to keep the recaps relatively quick. I used to read this book when I was really young. It's written by a man named Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions. It was actually written by Richard Erdos, who it was dictated to by Lame Deer, and he actually is a Lakota medicine man from the Rosebud Reservation. What's up, AJ? How you doing? Happy New Year. Thank you for joining. Hope you guys are in the mood for some bookish content. And this is sort of in the vein of a memoir, but it's more like a spiritual Bible, I guess you could say, of how we can live better spiritually, and how we can sort of interact with the earth and, the spirituality of the earth, and also within the context of Native American history. So just a really, really great Native American memoir that is, sort of in the modern era. This was published in the 50s or 60s, I believe. I want to say 1962 or something like that. So, we have a really interesting perspective of Lame Deer, who grew up on the Rosebud Reservation, very hard upbringing. But by the end of the book, we sort of get this analysis from Lame Deer on how to conduct yourself in, like we said, not only in a spiritual manner, but also in a way that sort of gets you in touch with Mother Earth. He talks a lot about how the white man, the European settlers, caused a lot of destruction to America and to nature, and he's trying to get us out of that infallible trap. So really interesting book if you guys are into Native American history, Native American memoirs. I definitely recommend it. Up next, we have Somewhere in Time by Richard Matheson. You guys may or may not have seen my esoteric analysis of this. And this is a rather esoteric book, but it also has a lot of other elements, obviously, of science fiction and time travel. And, obviously we have the love story. You guys might have seen the movie with Jane Seymour and Christopher Reeve. But very just sort of, it's hard to pinpoint exactly how, I don't want to say mysterious. My dad keeps getting on me for saying esoteric, but that's really what this book is. We have Freemasonry, we have Christian Science, we have seances, we have time travel. So it's just a really good introduction to sort of that genre of more esoteric science fiction, as opposed to just, like Star Wars or something. This is obviously, it's in the context of a romance, but there's really a lot to it. You guys should definitely check out the analysis, and I will post the link in the description of this video for that analysis after this stream is all said and done with. Up next, we have the Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching, I think that's how you pronounce it, by Lao Tzu. Really interesting, poetic Chinese philosophy. And we actually did an analysis of this as well, so I encourage you guys to check that out. And you can really pick this up anytime, to get some nourishment for your soul. You don't have to feel pressured to read it cover to cover or anything like that. But just a really great sort of holistic spiritual poetic narrative that we get from Tao Te Ching, very ancient Chinese philosophy about how to live a better life. And there's some ones that stand out in here. Maybe we can try to read one. Like I said, we've done an analysis. It's just really great stuff like this. One who speaks does not know. One who knows does not speak. Become one with the dust of the world. One who knows the secret is not moved by attachment or aversion, swayed by profit or loss, nor touched by honor or disgrace. So obviously, a lot of this stuff is hard to apply, on a daily basis. Philosophy is very challenging in that way to apply it on a regular basis, but I think it is important. Charles Marlowe says, Europeans destroyed this land. Pretty sure they built an actual civilization on it. Yes, they did, but they destroyed the way of living, I guess you could say, for the early Native Americans. I guess that would be fair to say, right? Their lifestyle, their quote-unquote progress was incompatible with the Native Americans. Of course, as we discussed, Native Americans, obviously were very destructive in their own ways, but not so much to the actual land as far as technology and building dams and building factories and all that stuff. The left hand builds and the right destroys. Yes, very possible, another T. So up next we have Edith Wharton's Ethan Frome. I'm going to try not to hold these in front of the screen here. So this was something we read, I forgot when we finished this, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. It was a really good read. It does require a rereading. But this was about this man who lived out in the middle of nowhere, and it was, I forgot where it took place, but he's taking care of his sick wife. His parents just died or something. His name is Ethan. And then this woman, I think she's like a servant or something along those lines, comes to sort of take care of Ethan Frome and his ailing wife, his physically failing wife. And then sort of the relationship dynamic gets really complicated between the three of them. And, his wife is getting on in years and she's dying, and he sort of starts to develop this flirtatious relationship with this younger woman that comes there. And then I don't want to tell you guys the ending, but it's a pretty profound, pretty sad, creepy ending. And yeah, I'm kind of just forgetting about what the overall themes of this book was, but it was definitely a good read if you guys are into modern classics. Like I said, we're just doing a quick recap of some of these. You guys have definitely heard of this, Romeo and Juliet. This was a pretty interesting read. This was my reintroduction to Shakespeare. I had gotten away from Shakespeare for many years and sort of reintroduced myself with Romeo and Juliet. We also read Hamlet and King Lear. We'll talk about that later as the evening progresses. And we have a lot of themes in Romeo and Juliet. Of course, we have the theme of the romance, right? But it's also a struggle between different classes. The sort of the socioeconomic, political struggles that Romeo and Juliet are obviously caught up in. But we also have a lot of other elements in here. And I actually didn't leave any sticky notes in here. But Shakespeare obviously is a whole dark chest of wonders as far as the occult and the esoteric is concerned, the philosophical as well as the mythological. So this would be a good little place to start. It's short. I think this is probably one of Shakespeare's most well-read plays. Obviously, I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favorite Shakespeare play because I think what Romeo and Juliet suffers from is the way that they communicate with each other, particularly Romeo and Juliet, is not always completely believable. Yes, everybody's trolling 24/7. Is that a fake Charles? No, that's the real Charles. Well, unless there's another Charles in here, but the only one I see is the real one. I sure hope it's the real one. Maybe I'm being trolled by a fake Charles Marlowe account. Up next, we have Fyodor Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground / The Double, 2 novels in one, Penguin Classics edition. We actually did a full analysis of both of these, I think. Notes from the Underground primarily, which is basically, you guys have probably heard about Notes from the Underground. It's one of his one of his more famous narratives about basically the guy is a sociopath and he's living in this Russian society that keeps beating him down, basically. And we see sort of his mental unraveling into complete destructive, how do you say, malignant narcissism, perhaps. And then he has this relationship with this prostitute, and he sort of emotionally woos her and then sort of emotionally destroys her at the same point in time. And we don't see any redemption from this character. He's almost like the modern day, I don't even know how you would describe it, but there's a lot of parallels you can draw from a story like Notes from the Underground, old Russian society from the 1800s. Has a lot of similarities to what we're kind of seeing now in society with all the the mass shooters and all that crazy stuff, all the political division. And really what Notes from the Underground is about is just about the not only the mental unraveling or the incorrigible narcissism of this particular protagonist, but the acceptance of himself that he realizes he's not really ever going to change. And the book kind of leaves you wondering what's going to, take place after that. And basically what The Double was written in 1846, about 10, 15 years prior to Notes from the Underground. And The Double is another typical Dostoevskian mental unraveling of a male protagonist. But it's almost like it leaves it open for interpretation. Is Mr. Galyakin, that's his name, is he schizophrenic? Is he crazy? Is he paranoid? Is he being framed by these people around him? And you see not only his mental unraveling, his mental deterioration, but we see his paranoia in full swing. And he convinces himself and convinces the community that there's like another version of him. That's why the book is called The Double. And basically that could be a manifestation of his own psychotic neurosis. But what I think it is a manifestation of his like alter ego of the person he's kind of striving to be. And he obviously does not really achieve that, and they end up locking him away in a mental ward. But I definitely recommend these two, particularly this edition, if you're looking just to get, dip your toes into Dostoevsky. This is a good place to start. They're both about maybe 100, 120 pages. So a good place to start with Dostoevsky. Running out of room for all these books. I have to start putting them on the floor. If you guys have read any of these books or heard of any of these authors, just let me know in the chat. Up next, we have Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Now, I will say, just for the record, that I think this entire collection of these books that we read in 2023, some of them they started in maybe November and December of 2022, like right on the cusp as we were coming into 2023, but the majority of them were read, post 2023 or starting in January, February of 2023 and so on and so forth. So just for the record, maybe two or three of them might have been started prior to the beginning of 2023. So, like we said here, we have Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This was, I believe, the second James Baldwin narrative that we read. And this is about a homosexual man. Well, he's actually maybe more like bi, but he grows up, sort of in a complicated family situation with his father. And then he moves to Paris and sort of falls in love with this hangers-on ne'er-do-well type. And the guy, I probably shouldn't spoil the ending, but, so what if we do? Because by the time you guys get to any of these books, you're probably not going to remember anything I said. But he has this turbulent romantic relationship with this man, but he's also still having physical relationships with women. Hey, Kale, how you doing? Thank you for joining. Happy New Year. For the record, we're talking about James Baldwin here. And this is a pretty short novel. It's pretty easy to digest in a week or two, maybe a month if you want to take your time. But with James Baldwin, we sort of see this disillusionment with modern society. and we see complicated romantic relationships as a homosexual, bisexual, whatever the heck we would consider him. We also see sort of the American struggle of African Americans, right? That's part of his narrative, at least from his point of view. And like we said, he falls in love with this ne'er-do-well, and then the ne'er-do-well ends up committing a crime, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. And it's a pretty sad story, but it was really good. And I'm going to have to definitely explore more James Baldwin into this year and into the upcoming years. But I guess his writing didn't completely blow me away or anything like that, but maybe I just have to keep reading him. He also wrote, The Fire Next Time and If These Streets Could Talk and a bunch of other stuff. So up next we have the Joey Kramer Hit Hard memoir / rock, historical biography / autobiography. I'm not going to talk too much about this because it's a typical sort of, rock and roll memoir, right? But it's more about Joey Kramer's mental unraveling, which was actually pretty interesting. But we didn't really see Joey Kramer, get into sort of the questionable acts of, his frontman, Steven Tyler, or anything like that. So it wasn't like a full-on expose that I was kind of hoping for, but, I guess they got to be loyal to their boy Tyler. So, yeah, just feel free to drop in and out whenever you can, Kale. I know work comes first. The introduction was written by Nikki Sixx. Nikki Sixx wrote the Heroin Diaries. So Joey Kramer, he's obviously a crazy drummer, right? But he had a complicated, abusive relationship with his father. And then on top of that, he sort of started to become codependent on Steven Tyler, and Steven Tyler also emotionally abused him as well. And Joey Kramer talks about the fact that he always finds himself in these abusive relationships. So just an interesting, vulnerable sort of story about a male, which we don't often hear, about a male who is abused mentally and emotionally. And at the same point in time, he's having to deal with fame and drugs and all that kind of stuff too. So he's adjusting to that. Definitely a really good read if you're interested in Aerosmith. But other than that, nothing super duper profound or anything like that. Just a typical rock and roll memoir, but it's more focused on the genre of mental health and maybe narcissistic abuse. Up next, we have Frances Burney Evelina, which I believe we did do an analysis of this. You guys can check it out on the playlists on the in-depth literature channel here. And this was sort of it was definitely a feminist narrative, but it had a lot of other elements to it that sort of pertain to how does a woman find dignity within the confines of social class? How does she learn to sort of climb the different echelons of society? And what does it actually mean to be a woman, I think is kind of what she was sort of getting at. Now, this is obviously in sort of the, it's in sort of the vein of maybe Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre, but it's actually this was written prior to those authors. So it's interesting if you're interested in that time period. We have themes of like social snobbery and sexual aggression, and how a woman is conditioned to present herself, and does she abide by those sort of mannerisms? Does she abide by those customs, or does she sort of, turn a middle finger to it and sort of interject herself in society the way she sees fit? So just kind of an interesting, this was before the modern woke feminism. This was like back when feminism actually had to write really long books and, do really interesting in-depth analysis of their social and spiritual condition surrounding women. So that was a really interesting read. Up next, we have Daniel Defoe's Moll Flanders, which was a little bit of a struggle to read because of the way that it's written. It's written sort of episodically, like you would maybe open somebody's diary and it's sort of presented as almost like a diary. There is some dialogue, there is some action, and a little bit of some character arc, but the style itself is, I even wrote here, The writing is dense, remote, repetitive, but moves along quickly as far as the story goes with ease and speed. So, and we did annotate this quite a bit, but it's a little bit of a challenge just because of the social context and the time period that's passed. But if you're interested in, and it's actually written by a male author, which is interesting, but I sort of skipped over what the actual book is about. But the little introduction here is one of the most determined, energetic, and lusty heroines in all of English literature. Daniel Defoe's Moll Flanders will do anything to avoid poverty, and she's basically born in Newgate Prison, I think, which is in England somewhere. She comes from really bad stock. Her mother's a criminal. Her father was an alcoholic, and she's basically, alone by herself in society, and she's trying to figure out how to get out of that. So it's a little bit prior to, let me see when this was published. This was published in the 1700s, so it's not exactly in the vein of like 18th, or maybe we could say 17th/18th century modern sort of societal feminism, but it's sort of a precursor to that. It's sort of ushered in, people like Frances Burney that we just discussed, and people like Charlotte Bronte, and people like Jane Eyre, and people like even like Edith Wharton in the modern era. Despite the fact it was written by a male author, it was basically just sort of ushering in this new social consciousness of women having more rights in society, whether it's voting rights or rights in the courtroom and all that stuff. But she's actually kind of a sociopath in the actual book, which is interesting. He's not really presenting this perfect, goody two-shoes type of woman, which was interesting. So definitely worth the read if you're into, old school classics and stuff. Up next, we have The Hills Beyond by Thomas Wolfe. This is a collection of Thomas Wolfe short stories. And actually, this one was rather good, but I actually am reading another anthology of Thomas Wolfe short stories that's actually much more extensive, and just the stories seem a lot better. But this sort of expounds on Thomas Wolfe's philosophy of the Gants and the Pentlands and sort of his whole mythology that he creates with his family from Asheville, North Carolina. We see struggles between, the racial tensions of blacks and whites in early Southern America, but we also see one man's sort of burgeoning ambition to become a writer and to get out of the restrictions and the desolation of his family sort of upbringing. His father's an alcoholic. His mother's a very stingy boarding house owner. And obviously these aren't novels. They're short stories. They're pretty easy to get through. But it's basically the sequel or the conclusion to where Thomas Wolfe kind of left off with all of his novels, or maybe he wrote some of these stories in between. So can't say enough great things about Thomas Wolfe, but we've done a decent amount of Thomas Wolfe content over here. So you guys I'll point you to the Thomas Wolfe videos. Up next, we have American Predator by Maureen Callahan. This is the true story of Israel Keyes. Talks about his most, sort of, famous, murders or kidnappings and all sorts of deranged things he was involved in. But Maureen Callahan's thesis in this is that Israel Keyes was basically an unprecedented serial killer. And if you actually read the book, you'll actually kind of understand why, he goes beyond the realm of Ted Bundy or, Ed Gein or, Gary Ridgway. He kind of took all of those meticulous, deranged endeavors by all those killers and sort of orchestrated his own system of evading the FBI and evading the authorities and evading being caught for quite some time, and went to very crazy lengths to remain hidden. And there's speculation that, there's a lot of cold cases that could be potentially linked to him. And he actually committed suicide in his cell, by cutting his own wrist somehow, with a piece of glass or something, or razors or something, and then he like did these little weird portraits written in his own blood. So like if there's not some kind of strange connection to, some kind of other societal / government entity, I would be surprised, just for the sheer fact of how much Israel Keys was able to get away with. It's just, like I said, unprecedented. Really good, very definitely page-turning true crime book if you guys are interested in that. So up next, this was an old book that I think we read in 2023, but it might have been on the cusp of that, and that was Esoteric Hollywood by Jay Dyer, which was really interesting, talking about occult symbolisms, esoteric Freemasonry that we see in the films of Stanley Kubrick, and all kinds of famous movie directors, David Lynch, people like that. And I think Jay Dyer's potential thesis in this expose was sort of that Hollywood, they're celebrating a lot of occult elements in their film, but they're also, I think, how did he word it? He said that that Hollywood itself was kind of a ritual or something. That, the first chapter is called Film as Ritual, and what Hollywood is essentially potentially doing is sort of indoctrinating the viewers, the public, into without giving you all the information. They're sort of, ritualizing you into their sort of customs, but they're also thinly veiling their, esoteric conspiratorial agenda by sort of getting you slowly hooked into their worldview, but they're not exactly telling you the full potential of that, or they're not exactly telling you the full meaning behind what it is they're actually doing. And he discusses a lot of different films, Space Odyssey, 2001, like we said, Shining, Stanley Kubrick. He's got some stuff in here, from The Shining. We have sort of some little bit of Baphomet sort of, idealization there in the, from Stanley Kubrick. Talks about Clockwork Orange as well. And like I said, when we did this analysis, you don't necessarily had to have watched a lot of films, but it definitely helps. If you haven't really seen a lot of the movies he's talking about, you're probably going to have a little bit of gap in knowledge or information, but still a really, really great esoteric expose on the elite culture of Hollywood film. So definitely something you guys should check out. He actually published another one called Esoteric Hollywood 2. I think there might even be a third one. I can't remember. But anyway, moving on to Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature. This was one we read way back in the beginning of 2023, somewhere along those lines. This was Robert Greene's newest effort that he came out with, and it's actually really long, and I think we might actually go back and do an analysis of this, but it's actually a little too long. I think he could have condensed it a little bit, maybe said after a while Robert Greene tends to kind of repeat himself, which I think is maybe slightly intentional, but I think sometimes he just goes on a little bit too long. But this is about sort of the when we're dealing with Robert Greene, we're always dealing with, he sort of breaks his books down, he breaks his worldview down into laws, quote unquote laws or rules, sort of like the Jordan Peterson book, but he sort of analyzes the success and failures of historical figures, right? Which I think is really interesting. He talks about everybody from Leo Tolstoy to Martin Luther King, and talks about what was the not only what was the impact that their struggles had on them that correlate to the success that they had, but also there's this element of basically what Robert Greene does is like sort of historical philosophy, self-help / biography / he does a little bit of everything, which is really interesting. So if you guys are not familiar with Robert Greene and you like history, or you like philosophy, or you like self-help, he's not so minimalistic that it's like self-help on that basic level, but he does have a little bit of that element of sort of Jordan Peterson-esque self-help, advice and stuff like that. So that is the first stack of books. We've only been on for 40 minutes, so we're actually making pretty good progress. We're going to move to the second stack. This book, Christmas Carol, we did a full analysis of this. Not going to talk too much about that. This was my first introduction to Charles Dickens. So I hope you guys did, enjoy that analysis. And what we see with A Christmas Carol, like we talked about, is, we have the three visitations from the spirits that come to, sort of be labor, Ebenezer Scrooge, and that sort of represents the Trinity, right? The God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, perhaps. And so and also we have the, sort of the Hamlet-esque struggle of the other protagonist, what's his name? Marley, Jacob Marley's. He's confronted with Jacob Marley's ghost, and he's carrying around chains, and he's talking to ghosts. And so we sort of have this parallel between Christianity and also paganism, but also there's a lot of Shakespearean sort of, ideas that Charles Dickens sort of, teaches us about. And it's very, I hate to say this word again, but it's definitely esoteric. And we sort of see this Christmas inversion, which is pretty typical in Hollywood. And obviously this isn't Hollywood, but Charles Dickens was kind of inverting Christmas before that was even a thing. Like with Eyes Wide Shut, just happened to take place on Christmas. Kind of weird. So that's kind of what Christmas Carol is in a nutshell, but it's also about redemption and forgiveness and, the holiday spirit and all that good stuff. So there's a lot of different ways you could sort of analyze that. Yeah, I like how you found the Trinity comparison. You pay attention to detail. Yeah, somebody, I had to sort of get those ideas from a lot of other people because I didn't really, see it at first as a Christian Trinity, but yeah, that's kind of what it is. So that's very interesting, and it's pretty obvious, but it's like if you're not well versed in sort of, metaphors and analogies, or what's the word I'm looking for? Not metaphors, but I can't think of the word. But if you're not well versed in sort of the literature parallels and religious parallels and mythological parallels, it's kind of hard to come up with some of those ideas on your own. Of course, that's why it's good to read people like Harold Bloom or just watch other analysis and kind of see what they have to say, and then it kind of clicks, But because sometimes, particularly with Shakespeare, that stuff is not very obvious. You do have to kind of do some homework and have somebody to kind of hold your hand to kind of learn that stuff. Allegory, yeah, that's the word we were looking for. Because a lot of this stuff is very allegorical, especially literature. I mean, not every writer is necessarily allegorical, but there's probably allegorical elements within every writer to a certain degree. So we're moving on now to Marcel Proust, and I'm going to lump these two into one topic here because these are the first two volumes in A la Recherche de Temps Perdus, which translates from French to In Search of Lost Time, or the original title was Remembrance of Things Past. And I've struggled with Marcel Proust quite a bit, but he is a very rewarding writer, and I've been influenced by his really long, languid sentences and the way he sort of unveils things with memory. And somebody actually left a really good critical comment on my Marcel Proust video that to really I don't know how many times we're going to drop books on the computer, but to really understand Proust, you have to understand a lot of other things that were going on in the French society back then. It helps to know more about Proust himself. He was sickly, and he was sort of he wasn't like royalty, but he was a very well-to-do, Jewish man, that had an overbearing relationship with his mother, and then there's speculation whether he was actually a hypochondriac or if he was actually really sick all the time, but he suffered from asthma, and then he kind of wrote this long series called Remembrance of Things Past, in bed, sitting up, writing with a pen and paper as he was sort of dying. At least the last volumes were written in that way. And there's a lot of, social snobbery and sort of, a lot of stuff that's very contingent on the time period. But Marcel Proust is rewarding, number one, just because his writing is so beautiful. But you have to really be sort of invested in the long languid ride that he's taking you on. His characters are not particularly fascinating. His characters don't have a tremendous amount of character arc, but there is something to be gleaned from Marcel Proust. And I'm hoping by the time we finish A la Recherche de Temps Perdus, we will sort of understand why we took on the Proust project to begin with. We're taking a couple months off from Proust, and then we're going to probably start reading the third volume at some point. So up next, we have John Steinbeck's East of Eden, which was sort of a modern retelling of the book of Genesis. So again, we're talking about allegory, and if you're not familiar with the book of Genesis, you can still get a lot out of it. You could almost read it in reverse or vice versa. I actually started reading the book of Genesis just to kind of prepare for this, but it wasn't completely necessary. Maybe it was. Maybe I didn't understand completely all the allegories, but it's really can stand alone as its own story. It takes place in the Salinas Valley, which is typical of John Steinbeck, and we see the struggle between Adam and the what's her name, Catherine, who was played by Jane Seymour in the movie East of Eden, which was rather good. So we have the religious struggle, but we also have this idea of sexuality as a complete sin, almost outside of the virtues of love, that is. And John Steinbeck sort of he sort of demonstrates for us the seductive toxicity of lust and sex, right? And that's one of the things that pulled the two brothers apart in this book. And, talking about the book of Genesis, that's a little bit, John Steinbeck kind of took those themes and sort of put it in a more modern analysis, I guess you could say. But exploring themes of the mystery of identity, the inexplicability of love, and the murderous consequences of love's absence. So just really a lot going on here. If you guys are interested in religious allegory or just interested in Steinbeck and early California sort of culture, I definitely recommend East of Eden. It's probably one of Steinbeck's strongest, most epic novels, and I would like to do a rereading and future analysis on that. Here's another one that we're going to lump in with another one, and we actually talked about this in my last live stream. We had the Booker T. Washington, and Booker T. Washington doesn't need too much of an introduction. He's sort of a famous African-American activist. Then we have this book that's going to dovetail really nicely with the story of the Negro. This one's called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. This is more like a memoir novel, sort of poetic literature type, and this is more like a historical, sociological analysis of the plight of, the Negro, as the title says here, the plight of African Americans. But it wasn't what I expected. Booker T. Washington was actually much more maybe sympathetic and maybe more progressive, and some of his views are kind of divisive on slavery compared to what I'm sure the Marxists would probably not be a fan of this book because it's so compromising, perhaps. And we'll talk about why. So we do have a live stream planned for both of these books. I just finished this one the other day, and this one, on the other hand, is much more like what you would get out of the typical slave narrative, like Harriet Tubman or somebody like that. So that's going to be interesting to kind of compare those, so you guys can stay tuned for that live stream. That's probably going to be my next live stream, is sort of talking about those two books. Trying to figure out where we're going to put all these books here. So up next, we have some more Thomas Wolfe, and we talked a little bit about this in the Thomas Wolfe, biography, or the Thomas Wolfe analysis that we did. The video is called Why You Should Read Thomas Wolfe, and I would definitely say out of Thomas Wolfe's later novels, this one would have to be one of my favorites. I don't even want to start talking about this because if I start ranting about Thomas Wolfe, I'll never shut my mouth. But you can see this one is, pretty heavily annotated. All kinds of good stuff in here we got from Thomas Wolfe. Anytime you need life nourishment or you need some kind of existential pat on the back, I definitely recommend Thomas Wolfe. Don't feel pressured to read him, as extensively as I have, but I think you will get something out of Thomas Wolfe if you. But he's lost to those that resist him, right? He's lost to those that don't have a very good attention span, and he's lost to those that don't think about their life in sort of an existential way. I definitely recommend you guys and gals do that for your own spiritual development. So up next, we have The Entity. We talked about this on the live stream. Very occult exploration of abuse and trauma, and also a potential paranormal psyop that came out of UCL University by Carrie Gaynor and Barry Taft, I believe. There's a really good synopsis of this in the Ghost Report sightings documentary from 1996. I think the original aired in like 91, believe it or not. But if you guys ever saw the Ghost Report, you'll know a little bit about this case. You like this book jacket? Yeah, this is a great book jacket. This is actually not the original cover, Kale. The original cover was a little more erotic. It had the main characters just sort of like had her face lying down as the entity was, kind of accosting her or something. But this, I quite like this one as well. So this is probably one of the best horror novels that I've ever read, sort of in the vein of Stephen King, but maybe a little more, I don't know. It's very Stephen King, but I would say Frank De Felitta's writing is not anything like Stephen King. I think Frank De Felitta is a better writer than Stephen King. He's maybe not as prolific, but he's a really good writer. So not too much else to say about this. Just a really good, and I'm not downplaying it. I'm just not going to talk too much about it because we already discussed it. But I definitely recommend you all read this. Makes for a really good October Halloween themed book. You could start it in maybe September and just really take your time with it. It is really dense. It does take some time to get through. You guys can see all of the, but I just really fell in love with the protagonist, Carlotta Moran. And you just really want her to succeed. You really want her to do well. But unfortunately, the novel is pretty bleak with how it ends. So up next, we have Pulp by Charles Bukowski, which we did a really interesting, fun analysis of. And basically, this was Bukowski's final novel. And I think in a lot of ways, it was better than some of his earlier work because it was more allegorical. We keep talking about that word. But we have a lot of allegories to not only other writers, but also to sort of this mythology that he was constructing with sort of the Black Sparrow press that he was, that working under. And we have characters like Celine. There's a reference to Celine, the French existential writer. And it's typical Bukowski. It's a really good time, but I think it's maybe a little bit deeper because Bukowski is facing his own mortality, physically, sexually, and also creatively. So if you guys are interested in that, definitely check out Bukowski's Pulp. It's fairly easy to read. You could read it in less than a month, probably a couple weeks if you're diligent. So we are down to our final stack. So I'm really excited about this. I appreciate you guys hanging on for the ride. Up next, we have The Howling by Gary Bradner. This was a occult werewolf novel, esoteric occult werewolf novel that we also did an analysis of on the live stream from back in October. You guys can check that out. But this is sort of obviously it's a werewolf, novel, but there's a lot of themes of repressed sexuality, sexual sin, lust, and also this idea of a secret werewolf society, conspiracy that takes place within us. And you could maybe take that not literally as werewolves, but maybe as, a secret entity working for the benefit of their own sort of endeavors, right? So I'm not going to talk too much about The Howling, but definitely recommend it. It's kind of in the vein of Stephen King, but it has some really good sort of erotic, parts in it and a lot of really interesting occult information. Up next, we have John Gardner's on Becoming a Novelist. This is my first introduction to John Gardner, but I really enjoyed this quite a bit. And he talks about sort of how not only you should try to make your writing as best as you possibly can, but there's this idea of the novelist as a marathon runner. And that's what a novelist has to sort of learn to do, is to sort of, it's like he's training for a marathon. He's going the long distance. He's writing, and he's writing this really long, convoluted story, and he has to kind of, keep his wits about him and not lose the plot and not lose his breathing. And just a really fascinating, creative book about writing. You could apply this to other artistic endeavors, But Charles says some women may have a werewolf Fantastic. I think, yeah. There's definitely that element of that. I think we discussed that, with the Howling movie in particular, because that's, yeah. You guys can check out the live stream, but yeah, that's definitely an element of horror. Is at least from primarily, I would say from some of the male writers, is this sort of projected eroticism of what they perceive women's fantasies may or may not be. And yeah, I think a lot of women do have sort of this not, maybe it's not a literal werewolf fantasy, but just sort of this idea of giving up or submitting your power to a uncontrollable male, desire, perhaps. So, but getting back to John Gardner here, just really interesting. This kind of dovetails really nicely with Stephen King's On Writing, which I would say John Gardner's book on writing is much more superior to Stephen King's. This was a good read. It's got some good information in it, but Stephen King, he can be kind of patronizing sometimes, and he was trying to crack too many jokes, and his jokes weren't really that funny. And but he's got some decent writing advice, right? But Stephen King is so prolific, so it's hard to, you have to take what he says for a grain of salt. But he talks about, how he was an alcoholic, of course, and, how he was getting rejection slips. But does Stephen King have some potential connections to the publishing industry or something that he's not, unveiling here maybe? But he did kind of, supposedly, he kind of struggled, to become a successful writer, right? So that was an interesting read. I think my dad actually read this too. Up next, we have the Mammoth, Obese, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, which was actually quite a good read. And I think to further understand something like War and Peace, it would be good to read like a biography of Napoleon or something like that, or something about the Napoleonic Wars, or something about the struggles between France and Russia back then. But it functions as a history book, but obviously it's a novel. So it functions as historical narrative, but we have these wonderful cast of characters, and it does kind of stick with you. You remember these characters, you remember what they went through. I would love to do a rereading of this, but I think we're going to read Anna Karenina first before we read War and Peace. Charles says Stephen King supposedly is what? It's an FTM. Yeah, was that ever confirmed? I do have my suspicions. I don't know. I mean, he had a beard, but yeah, he's kind of delicate in some ways. Stephen King is an FTM. Let me know what you guys think about that. He's just weird. Like, he's just a weird looking dude in general. But yeah, just really fascinating, epic, a Russian epic. It's not what you get with Tolstoy is more like there's much more hope in Tolstoy than there is somebody like Dostoevsky, right? Tolstoy is more like a sociologist, where Dostoevsky is kind of like a psychologist, or deals with mental problems and stuff like that, lack of redemption. But Leo Tolstoy, just really great novel. I haven't decided if where it ranks exactly on my favorite list of novels, but it's definitely an epic read, and it's really great, and you'll feel like you accomplished something really epic when you read it. Up next, we have King Lear, another Shakespeare that we read, and I actually quite enjoyed this. I watched a lot of other analyses about King Lear, and obviously King Lear is a story about the king who's getting old and he's going crazy, and sort of all that stuff, right? But it's also about the fact that he, sometimes I get King Lear mixed up with Hamlet. Let me just make sure I got these characters right. All I have to do is go to the character list. Does this one have a character list? I don't think this one does. But yeah, you guys are probably familiar with King Lear. I'm trying to find out what these characters are here. Okay, yeah, so his daughters, Goneril and Regan and all that stuff, Cordelia. He's sort of, getting old in years, and he's trying to divide his kingdom up among his kin, among his children, right? And in order to do so, he's demanding that his daughters sort of profess their love for him to prove their loyalty. And I think it's Cordelia, I want to say, that is not really doesn't like that element of manipulation, so she kind of rebels, and then King Lear, kind of excommunicates her, disowns her temporarily. It's just a really great sort of, analysis of a failing king, right? But we also have some other esoteric elements, some occult stuff that comes up. Hey, Dreama, how you doing? We're almost finished with the stack of books here. You came kind of late, but of course you can watch the replay. We're just doing a little quick analysis of King Lear. These are all the books we read in 2023. And then we have King Lear sort of wandering out with the fool. He's wandering the wastelands out in the wilderness with the fool. And it's not it's not called a tragedy for no reason. It's because it's a tragedy. And the whole family basically falls apart, and it's just a really good medieval play. It's more like Elizabethan or maybe Jacobonian or, Elizabethan tragedies, right? You got the family emergency going on. I almost forgot about that. No worries. I'll catch up with you about that after. Up next, we have Dark Days by Randy Blythe, which I probably should do a analysis of. And I'm actually reading another memoir right now. What's it called? It's called, I can't even remember the title, but it's by, anyway, Marissa recommended it to me, and I'm actually reading it right now. It's called, what is it called? Something, A Life on Methamphetamines or something. So it's like a drug memoir. But anyway, going back to Dark Days by Randy Blythe, this is the singer from Lamb of God and his ordeal over in the Czech Republic when he sort of got accused of involuntary manslaughter or, something like that for sort of pushing one of his fans off of the stage. And make a long story short, the kid died a couple days after the Lamb of God show, and he was arrested kind of out of the blue, and they went to play over there. It's just a really great memoir. Definitely not your typical rock and roll memoir. There's not really any, just the typical rock and roll nonsense. You will not find this in here. This is much more insightful. It's more about just one man's sort of awakening and his sobriety and his spiritual awakening that he found in prison, and he was, ended up getting acquitted. I think, that's the right word, right? He wasn't acquitted, but he was exonerated, I should say. He was granted total exoneration, and he was freed, but he did spend about 3 or 4 months in a Czech Republic prison. Didn't really know what was going to happen to him. His band members didn't know what the hell was going to happen to him. He does look like a lesbian, newly awakened. Stephen King, man, he gives off like weird lesbian vibes. Not saying you're weird if you're a lesbian, just saying he gives off something that's uncanny. There's something uncanny valley about Stephen King. Is he a potential, elite sort of FTM or something? Maybe it's possible. Up next, we have My Confederate Kimfolk, and I actually forgot about this, but we could actually dovetail this quite nicely with the Booker T. Washington and the other incidents in the life of a slave girl. This is kind of similar to that, but this is about how this black woman sort of unveils her, not only her black heritage, but also her European Anglo-American, I guess you could say, heritage. And it sort of opens up these ideas of what is actually race. Is race more of a social construct? Is it more of a physical construct, a biological construct? And I have my own thoughts and feelings about that. But Andrew, have you read The Secret by Donna Tartt? I've definitely heard of it. Wait, let me just make sure I'm reading this properly. Have you read The Secret History by Donna Tartt? No, I don't think I've read that. I've heard of the book called The Secret, that self-help psyop book that came out back in the 2000s. I will check that out, though. The Secret History. Is it like a Freemason type secret history, or what is it? It definitely sounds familiar. Up next, we're down to our last 2 books here. We have this biography of Edward II. and we actually supplemented this with a Christopher Marlowe play that we read way back in the beginning of 2023. We read Edward II by Christopher Marlowe. That was sort of like my Elizabethan Renaissance introduction to, so I could start reading Shakespeare and all that stuff, right? So we kind of started with Christopher Marlowe, and it was a really interesting play, really, sort of a tense political, social dynamic among, King Edward and, his father and his, what's the other guy's name? It was alleged that perhaps Edward II was having a homosexual relationship with, I keep wanting to say Gloucester. What the hell? Mortimer, maybe? Either Mortimer or the other guy. I can't remember his name, but just a really interesting figure. And it's hard to uncover biographical facts about people that are so long gone in history, right? But I think it's interesting to read the Elizabethan tragedies, the Renaissance tragedies, because, it's sort of like you sort of glean sort of a perspective on what these people may or may not have been like. After reading it, somebody says, after reading it, I wondered if King was attracted to children. Which book? Which book are you referring to exactly? Let me make sure I can't really adjust my chat on here at the moment. But which book are you referring to? Are you referring to The Shining or something? Yeah, Stephen King, like some of the stuff he writes about is definitely makes you wonder, is he all there? Is he, all sane? My mother always thought he was, he had that bad car accident because it was sort of like a result of karma of all the stuff that he wrote about. The Wives of Henry the Seventh is an excellent read. Yeah, I'll have to read that one too. I'm not too prolific with my Roman numerals there. That's why it took me a second to read that. But I think that's Henry VII, right? So lastly but not leastly, we have O Lost, which I think we did. We did an analysis. We did more like a comparison of O Lost versus Look Homeward Angel. And this is the original manuscript, the original version for Thomas Wolfe's Look Homeward Angel. And this one actually encompasses, like the first 100 pages is sort of the introductory mythology of his father when his father was young and all that stuff. So it was just a fascinating read. If you guys are not familiar with Look Homeward Angel or Eugene Gant, you have to just read Look Homeward Angel, and then you can start to open up the doors of the Thomas Wolfe universe, which is just wonderful. He's not talked about much anymore. He's kind of considered antiquated and old-fashioned and maybe even obscene or racist or offensive today. That's why they took him off the syllabus. But I think he's such an important American writer, and I'm just thankful that I kind of was able to discover him. I think Thomas Wolfe kind of finds you, not really the other way around. Somebody was referring to It. Yeah, I mean, whether or not the Pennywise is a reflection of Stephen King's fantasies, I mean, we can only speculate, right? But yeah, I mean, I think what Stephen King does is he writes about things. He expresses, I mean, it's really no different than like a death metal band like Cannibal Corpse or whatever, He's just sort of exploring and riffing on maybe some of his potential fantasies, but he's getting out his aggression. He's getting out his repressed anger, his repressed lust or whatever, his repressed criminal desires in the form of his books, so I don't see any harm in that, right? It's no different than like a heavy metal band, but I think obviously literature tends to influence and maybe have a little more weight, a little more power than just a run-of-the-mill death metal band, but at the same point in time, music is pretty darn powerful too. Okay, King Henry VIII, okay. Oh yeah, you had three little ones after the V there. So that we're going to end the live stream there. I hope you guys did enjoy it. I don't want to overstay my welcome. We'll keep this one kind of short. Hopefully this inspired you to read a little bit. Hopefully you can go back and watch the replay if you missed some of it. And, hopefully this inspires you to start reading today, make your year of 2024 packed full of books, packed full of life advice and life nourishment from these wonderful authors, and I'm always tempted to say it doesn't matter what you read, but it does. I would try to stick with books that are meaningful, books that have substance, books that are sort of grounded in reality. I mean, there's nothing wrong with fantasy or science fiction. We've read a lot of that stuff too. But you have to just be very, we're only alive for like a really short period of time in the grand scheme of things, right? So you have to be, you have to use your own discernment how to keep yourself on a good reading regimen. If you guys have any questions about any of these books, any of these authors, or any comments, suggestions, let me know in the comment section on the replay or whatever. And hope you guys have a great start to your 2024. I'm always tempted to say 2023. Yeah, you have a good year too, newly awakened, and I think we've just had a really interesting 2023. I would say 2023 was better than 2021 or even 2022. So I think society and personally, I think we're making progress, right? I went through some really rough stuff a couple of years ago, and different things, a lot of rugs being ripped out from under me and stuff like that. Sounds like my dad's breaking glass in there. So it's officially time to end the stream. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for joining. Sorry we got off to a rough start there. We had some technical difficulties, and then my brain I was just not warmed up. Maybe I should finish my glass of water here. God bless. Let's have a good 2024. Make sure you guys start, a reading schedule. If you guys need advice or you need a little bit of a syllabus, I thought about coming out with a little syllabus for books you could read in 2024, maybe a little bit of a reading schedule. Everybody reads at a different pace. But we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.